In the last few years, fitness content has absolutely blown up on YouTube. Names like Sam Sulek,
Don't tell the people around me, but I'm gonna go blow up the bathroom.
Lean Beef Patty, Jeff Nipples, and my personal favorite, the Trend Twins, have been dominating YouTube and Instagram Reels with ease.
Feels like I'm gripping a big BBC. That's how thick these damn bars are.
And the majority of these guys are pretty harmless. They lift weights on camera, eat food on camera, and act gay on camera. And while there is some controversy regarding some of them, ultimately, most of these guys are pretty harmless. But beneath the surface of the most mainstream creators, some of the less put together influencers have some serious problems. A combination of serious childhood trauma, looming mental health issues, steroid use, and millions of loyal fans is often a recipe for career disaster. So today, I'm bringing back an old series to discuss some of the most interesting cases and see where it all went wrong. In the world of modern fitness influencers, you've basically got two options. You can either go to Mexico to just buy steroids over the counter, or you can order them off the dark web. Everyone calls it the sketchy part of the internet, but the real danger is actually happening in plain sight, through data brokers quietly collecting and selling your personal information every day. Shady data broker companies compile reports like these on everyone, from all of your emails to current and former places you've lived, your relatives, who your neighbors are, and even things like if you own a boat. It's part of a disturbing industry that collects information from apps you use every day, which is then sold to these data brokers. And sure, you agreed to it, but that was buried in the terms and conditions. And let's be honest, nobody's reading that. But you gotta use Flapchat. How else are you supposed to goon? But thankfully, there is an easy way to remove your information from these data broker websites. And you don't even have to move to Nigeria to do it. Today's sponsor, Aura. Aura will scan their database of brokers looking for your information and will then submit opt-out requests on your behalf. But what if they put your information back up? Well, Aura will also follow up to make sure that info stays in the shadow realm. And while there are other companies that offer a similar service, none of them have as many features as Aura. VPN, antivirus, a password manager, credit monitoring for when you buy your Funko Pops, and 24/7 support based in the United States. You can go to my sponsor, aura.com/turkeytom, to try 14 days for free. That's enough time for Aura to start scrubbing your personal info off these data broker sites without you even lifting a finger. Check out the link in the description to start today, and a special thanks to Aura for paying me. Now let's get into the video. Now, this may come as a shocker to you guys watching, but our first case of criminal activity from the weightlifting world actually involves steroid use. If you're Australian or you already watch a lot of fitness content, you've probably heard of Tammy Hembrow, the founder of fitness fashion brand Sosky. She has 17 million followers on Instagram and was featured on the Forbes Australia 30 Under 30 list. She's basically the Australian Kim Kardashian. But she is not the focus here. Her brother is. Henry Thine, who was also an online personality and a fitness influencer, or at least was seriously trying to be. I guess he was succeeding, as not only was he absolutely jacked, he regularly got hundreds of thousands to millions of views on TikTok, where the brunt of his online activity could be found. His very first post to the account was in 2022, showing his physical transformation from his early teens to adulthood, now sitting at over 2 million views. But it seems like the clout he got from his online presence immediately made him feel like he could get away with anything, even violent crimes against another person. Enter Charlotte Chant, a female gym influencer who, at least now, is even bigger on the platform than Henry. By 2023, the two had gotten into a relationship, but it didn't take long before things started going terribly wrong. According to Charlotte's court statements, the offenses against her started in November of 2023, although in somewhat mild ways.
It started off very small with what I was wearing and who I could talk to, and then it went to, I want you to take photos of what you're wearing and send it to me. So every single morning I would wake up and send a photo of what I was wearing to him.
To get approval?
To get approval. I wasn't allowed to get my nails done, my hair done. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup, but he was with me constantly 24/7, wasn't allowed to be without him. He would come into the bathroom with me, wait for me to go to the toilet and stand in the toilet with me because he would be assuming that I'd be on my phone texting other people.
The notable and particularly egregious crimes only happened in March of the next year. One of the incidents took place when, while they watched a movie, Charlotte tried to cuddle with Henry, only to get elbowed in the head and insulted. When she texted a friend to come pick her up, Henry then pushed her against a wall while squeezing her throat, saying, "You're not going, I own you," which led Charlotte to think he was actually going to kill her. He proceeded to slam her onto a bed and strangle her, but fortunately, he stopped just short of going even further. Now, a week prior to this, a very similar, even if a lot less aggressive situation also took place, where Henri pushed Charlotte onto a bed and ripped off her pants.
I was getting ready to go to the gym with him, and I said to him, "Do you like my leggings?" And he flipped off and got so angry at me, pushed me on the bed, and then he just ripped my pants. He was like, "If you want to dress like a then I'll treat you like a." He had grabbed me by the throat and pushed me against the wall because I didn't let him have sex with me.
Thankfully, he didn't progress beyond that point, but that in and of itself already constitutes a pretty horrific image. Much later on, Charlotte posted a video showing screenshots of text messages with Henri, where he can be seen threatening to punch her, acknowledging and admitting he had strangled her, losing his mind at her because she had no phone service during a hurricane, insulting her for not responding while she attended her classes, and obsessively calling her hundreds of times. With these incidents only getting worse over time, Charlotte understood that these were a pattern and decided to get the police involved. While still recovering from the bruises from the strangling, she pressed charges against Henri, and although this led to his arrest and a protection order to keep her away from him, it wasn't too effective. Probably due to how well off his family was, with many of them being prominent cultural figures in Australia, he was bailed out instantly. But instead of being on his best behavior, he proceeded to attempt contact with her several hundred times through texts, phone calls, and social media messages, asking for her to not go to the police, declaring his love for her, and even threatening to hurt himself if she didn't take back her statements. Now, reports on the exact nature of his legal status are a bit confusing, but they lead me to believe that he was already out on probation by the time his assault of Charlotte took place, which only adds to how concerning all of this is. I found this newsreel about the case, and in it, they include footage of Henri attacking and beating up the boyfriend of another one of his exes, which may be the offense he was already facing some legal issues for. How does someone with this bad of a record manage to get bailed out and continue harassing his victim? Australia, bros, it might be over. Now, during the 4-month period after the incident, Henri's cyberstalking and harassment was so intense that Charlotte installed countless security cameras around her home, worried that he would break in and try to kill her. It's uncertain when exactly these measures were taken, but it's possible that they happened after an incident in which 3 unknown men approached her as she went to the gym and carved the letter H onto her body.
My face smashed in. They ripped my trackies open and got a razor blade and carved the letter H into my leg.
The first letter of Henri's name.
Probably in fear that things like these would reoccur, she eventually gave up and moved away entirely to avoid it. Because of the ways that he breached the protective order, he was arrested and released 3 separate times. But in July 2024, Henri once again found himself breaking the law. During a road rage incident, he assaulted the driver of another vehicle and spat on his car, which led to his final arrest. Despite claiming to be a natural bodybuilder online, once he was in custody, his defense rested heavily on his steroid abuse as an explanation for his behavior, claiming that he was seriously addicted to taking gear from the ages of 16 to 21, and as a consequence of not being on it while in custody, he had lost over 40 pounds. On top of that, he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, major depressive disorder, and bipolar, not to mention the fact that he made several attempts on his own life while being held. There were also mentions of him having a difficult childhood, suffering abuse from his mother, and needing to go through mental health treatment. Initially, these things seemed to not sway the judge very much, who basically told him that none of it excused or otherwise justified his actions. But upon his sentencing, it looks like this defense was actually somewhat effective. Although he had a total of 17 charges, including assault with intent to commit rape, domestic violence, strangulation, breach of bail, and resisting arrest, he was released on time served and parole. According to his influencer sister Tammy, she had no involvement whatsoever with his case. But Charlotte has implied in a few TikTok posts that this is a lie, suggesting that the entire family is complicit in repeatedly bailing out and protecting Henri.
And the justice system needs to be really evaluated on women's safety, because this man will reoffend.
Now, I'll leave it up to you to decide who is telling the truth here, but regardless, we can only hope that Henri never does anything like that ever again and is able to turn his life around, although only time will tell. While there's plenty of bodybuilders and notable fitness personalities who have, at some point in their life, resorted to criminality, very few have committed crimes as dramatic and notorious as Sally McNeil, so much so that she got her own Netflix original documentary. Born to the name Sally Dempsey in Allentown, Pennsylvania, she claims to have frequently witnessed domestic violence committed by her alcoholic father, Richard, which led her to have a very different personality and outlook on life than other girls. Over time, she joined her school's swimming, diving, and track teams with an express interest in eventually becoming a gym teacher. She even went to college for that purpose. Unfortunately, at some point, she simply ran out of money and could no longer afford to continue her studies, so she opted instead to honor a family tradition, joining the military, specifically the Marine Corps, which also allowed her to pursue bodybuilding as a hobby. Now, this drastic change in lifestyle wasn't just professional. At the point that she dropped out, she had already gotten married and had 3 kids with a man named Anthony Loudon, who she promptly divorced before putting their youngest child up for adoption. This eagerness to radically change her life was an early sign that Sally wasn't exactly thinking straight from the get-go. Now, in the documentary, she implies that Anthony was abusive towards her, and I'm not discounting her allegations here necessarily, but I will say that the only record we have is of Sally being the aggressor, aiming a gun at him and breaking his car's windows with a metal bar. But of course, it's possible that there was more going on behind the scenes that the public is simply not privy to. It's unknown what exactly kicked off her intention to completely rebuild her life, but it didn't take long for Sally's bodybuilding hobby to take over. She started taking steroids and taking part in professional competitions in the late 1980s, managing to get placements as high as 4th, as well as winning a couple of armed service championships. And this is when she met her future husband, Ray McNeil. Ray was also a professional bodybuilder, and as their relationship began, it further emboldened Sally's devotion to her own physique and bodybuilding career. But while she could balance her 2 careers pretty evenly for a while, eventually this took its toll on her work as a Marine. After reaching the rank of sergeant, her professional demeanor slowly but surely gave way to dysfunctional behavior, anger issues that turned into episodes of violence, concluding in Sally being demoted from her position and eventually discharged and banned from re-enlisting altogether. Ray decided to follow Sally's path in life, and by the early 90s, both of them were on their way out of military life and fully set on moving to California to make money from bodybuilding alone. Very little is known about the specific details surrounding this time period in Sally's life, but according to the documentary and testimonies from Sally's kids, this transition was pretty difficult. They had very little money, and consequently, everyone was stressed out. On top of that, throughout her entire life, Sally had always had the problem of seeing domestic violence as a normal part of life due to her traumatic childhood, and unfortunately, it would continue to show up during her marriage to Ray. Her children, who have obviously been adults for a long time now, recount incidents of Ray punching her in the face and splitting her lip, breaking her nose and multiple bones, choking her, and even violating her sexually. She wasn't the only target of his violence either, as he once blinded an unnamed man he was having a fight with and frequently beat Sally's son John, especially when she wasn't around. If that wasn't bad enough, both parties had to resort to doing odd jobs they didn't really like to keep the bills paid. Sally took part in what's referred to as muscle worship sessions, where she wrestled with men while mostly naked, sometimes on camera. This is not a funny euphemism for gooning either, it's actually wrestling. I have no idea why this was a thing back then. I thought this was just something that I did with the boys back home, but we try not to film it too often. But Ray McNeil, on the other hand, worked as a professional wrestler until 1994, a year prior to his death at the hands of Sally. Apparently, it was his work as a professional wrestler that led him to have many affairs with other women, which, at least in one instance, led Sally to nearly beat a woman to death and then pull a gun on Ray, which caused her to be suspended by the National Physique Committee for a year. Around the same time, she also got into a fight with a club owner and kicked him in the face before threatening to kill the police officers who intervened. Clearly, Sally and Ray were not in their right mind. And once again, this dysfunction manifested as another transition period, this time for Ray. After placing 15th in the last Mr. Olympia he took part in and abandoning his pro wrestling career, he decided he would look for work as an actor and comedian while acting as Sally's bodybuilding coach. This active role he took on her professional bodybuilding only made them butt heads even more, and in 1995, this would come to a bloody conclusion. As Valentine's Day approached, it became clear that Ray was once again having an affair, which made Sally concerned about catching STDs, and at the time, there was very little she he could do because denying Ray intercourse could result in a beating. Additionally, to try and fight back only made it worse, according to Sally, who said this: "One time, when I hit Ray back after he brutally beat me, it made the beating worse. He broke my rib and punctured my lung. My military records have this injury reported." Now, it's important to note that these are claims made by Sally and shouldn't necessarily be taken as gospel just because she was a victim at one point in time. There are cases like that of Courtney Clenny, which I've covered in a past video, where the woman is the aggressor in DV incidents that result in murder. Although the crime itself has been documented in depth by the court proceedings resulting from it, we only really know what happened from Sally's perspective, which goes as follows. On the night of Valentine's Day, Ray was going out with his mistress under the excuse of going out to get chicken for dinner. When he got home late, she accused him of cheating on her, which prompted him to violently attack her, and she shot him twice with a shotgun in self-defense. Although Sally's kids were in the apartment when this happened, they were in their bedrooms and only heard the shots, but didn't actually see anything go down. Now, after Ray was shot, Sally's daughter, Shantina, saw the aftermath and ran to a neighbor for help, while Sally called the police and informed them of what had just taken place. Although Ray did survive until the police got there, he died just 2 hours later. This was a pretty tricky case because while what Sally did could be seen as excessive, Shantina testified in her mother's defense, saying she could hear Ray choking Sally, reinforcing that it was self-defense. Additionally, it's worth noting that Ray weighed over 100 pounds more than Sally, so pretty much anything else wouldn't have been enough to physically equalize them. However, no DNA from Sally was found on Ray, and forensic analysis concluded that one of the shots was fired when Ray was already on the floor. This basically got her convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. Although she almost got out on one occasion through appeals, the decision was promptly reversed, and she ended up serving 25 years, being released in 2020. Thankfully, this story does have a somewhat happy ending because after she was released, she got married again and reconnected with her now adult children. Here's to hoping they were able to put these extremely traumatic events behind them. With a few non-YouTube related cases out of the way, we can now discuss a few individuals who my audience are most likely familiar with. If you've watched my video on Connor Murphy, then you know why I'm putting these three together due to how their stories intertwine. But I'll try to go over them individually so that you have a better grasp of who they are. We're going to start off with Connor Murphy.
You guys want to see what it is? You want to see your new favorite color?
Connor Murphy himself was, if his autobiographical videos are to be trusted, a socially inept kid who got heavily into sports to try and brute force his way to the top of the social hierarchy at school. Eventually, he found his way to weightlifting and got into great shape by his senior year. But he found that his gains did very little to help his social awkwardness. He then got transferred to a boarding school for the academically gifted, thinking maybe he would find some friends there. But still, he was alone. Eventually, probably because he himself was also watching this kind of stuff on YouTube, Connor decided to take advantage of his physical appearance to make a combination of PUA content and prank videos. In the early 2010s, PUA, or pickup artistry, was huge, as hundreds of thousands of kids with little to no ability to speak to women flocked to channels that claimed to teach them how to do it. And part of what they typically advised was to force yourself to become shameless and to get rid of any social anxiety, even if you had to pretend to be someone else entirely to do it. Well, that's pretty much what Connor proceeded to do on his YouTube channel, and with extremely great success. Eventually, his previous dedication to advanced academic pursuits, like studying computational maths in college, gave way to his more shallow and extravagant interests, such as his aforementioned YouTube success and a potential career in bodybuilding. But his bodybuilding dreams quickly fizzled out as it became clear that Connor's devotion to his physique was pretty much just so that he could flash it to strangers to get a reaction, and there was very little beyond that. But his YouTube channel continued to grow exponentially, as some of his videos got as many as 60 million views. But along the way, he also attracted some negative attention from commentary channels like H3H3, who would frequently comment on and criticize racy prank channels like Connor's.
Connor Murphy is my god. Connor Murphy is my god. I just want to. Connor Murphy, can you please take your shirt off? Please take your shirt off. Please take your shirt off. My name is Connor Murphy, please let me take my shirt off. so I can get your number, then bring her home and fuck.
And this is where the problem begins. Due to his original insecurity never really being solved and simply bypassed entirely, Connor continued to be completely incapable of handling criticism in a mature way. While he was getting away with this character flaw at the time because his channel was so successful, eventually the views started to plummet right alongside his mental health. Connor's lack of direction in life and the looming end of his online popularity led him to go on an ayahuasca trip that destroyed his mind and made him think he was smarter than everyone else. He then posted a video in which he, while still in a very mentally altered state, announced that he was going to take his own life. In this video, he also threw in some lies about his family and his early life, none of which are really noteworthy because he essentially proves himself to be a compulsive liar who just wants attention. Friends of his like Kenny Coe later made videos covering the situation and basically revealed that Connor was still very much alive. He had just been sent to a psychiatric facility. Apparently, the whole threatening to take his own life thing was a genius ruse from Connor, who thought that by telling a terrible lie to an audience of people who were rightfully concerned about his well-being, he was somehow outsmarting them or tricking them into enlightenment. He eventually returned to online content creation once he was released from the hospital, and despite trying to keep up appearances, he was still clearly delusional and acting as if he had found some secret of the universe that he was ready to impart to his audience. He also got a visit from the Norwood Reaper in the meantime. And tried twice to get hair transplants that didn't go that great, which I think is central to explaining why he lost his mind. It probably didn't help that he started a prolonged fast shortly after leaving the mental hospital and then briefly went vegan, although his real problems aren't really external. You see, once the hype died down after his supposed breakthroughs, he went back on many of his enlightened conclusions and slowly returned to pretty much the only thing he knew how to do well, looking jacked on YouTube. But when that still failed to get him attention, he then decided to go back to taking ayahuasca and make content about doing a whole bunch of it to get even more enlightened. Now, if you already feel like this story is made up and haven't seen my longer video about Connor Murphy or Sunny V2's video, then frankly, I don't blame you. But I promise, I've checked the archives, this information is all verified by true American patriots, and it gets even more insane from here. Surprisingly, doing ayahuasca did not fix Connor's life predicament. So he started doing sexy yoga with random strangers and opened an OF account where he drank some other guy's ball juice and his own piss, all while talking in a 20th century New Orleans black accent.
I apologize in advance for the particularly psychologically constructed inconvenience. I'm not giving a flying fuck.
Eventually, he graduated to falsely accusing famous YouTubers of improper sexual conduct and tried to reignite his beef with H3H3 by calling both H3 and himself child groomers. Fortunately, none of these stunts landed him back in the spotlight, and as he withered in obscurity and ate through what was left of his money, a woman named Jane Conquest spent a few days at his hoarder hell house, basically documenting his self-destruction in real time. Between his house being overrun with trash, him doxing his own bank information on Instagram, and sending random people audio of himself using gamer vocabulary, this really looked like Connor was bottoming out. But before he completely imploded, he published a book he supposedly wrote while reeling from his first DMT trip, and it's all stuff about how he's too smart for his own good and it's driven him insane. After a few more attempts at getting attention didn't yield results, and some allegations that Connor went gorilla mode on one of his ex-girlfriends, Connor then ate his own poop and then moved to Thailand to live with Tony Huge and make content with ladyboys. I mean, this guy basically speed ran destroying his life with as many horrific and funny outcomes as you could possibly imagine. So Connor had met this guy, Tony Huge. Tony is a former lawyer who basically turned into a professional steroid promoter whose chemical experiments on himself and others have earned him the reputation of a mad scientist of bodybuilding. He's also been in a ton of legal issues, but the only thing that really makes him relevant to this story is his relationship to another YouTuber named Leo and Longevity.
And that is one hell of a party trick. Girls will never forget you, I promise.
Leo and and Longevity is another fitness-related content creator who was with Tony Huge in Thailand until he suddenly passed away under mysterious circumstances right before Connor moved in. Just days before he passed, he was talking about moving away, and the pre-autopsy report listed the cause of his death as murder. So eventually, people in the online world turned their eyes to Tony Huge as a potential culprit, as his story about Leo's passing changed many times, and he eventually tried to suggest that Leo was assaulting some woman he was with, citing it as a potential reason why someone had him killed. Now, I'm not going to comment too much on the merits of these rumors, but to put it mildly, Tony Huge is a very eccentric and strange figure, and this controversy definitely added more lore to him than I think even he wanted. But what makes it all the more concerning is that when Connor got to Thailand, besides his Ladyboy OnlyFans exclusives, he also made some videos where he seemed to be doing a parody of Leo, and at one point, he went as far as to reenact how his death went down. Now, at the time that this happened, a lot of people definitely gave Connor shit for it, but they basically ruled him out as a potential co-conspirator since he had never showed himself to be someone who was violent or aggressive towards others, even when he was completely out of his mind. However, this changed once he was reported as beating his girlfriend with a golf club in mid-2024. As information was released about this crime, people found out that the house was a complete wreck, covered in blood, because during their scuffle, she apparently struck back and left a huge gash on his midsection. Lastly, it was revealed that Connor and his girlfriend were living with her 16-year-old sister, which is definitely concerning to say the least. Now, since this moment, things have been relatively quiet for Connor, with him basically resurfacing to shill for Tony's questionable products, and that's about it. So far, it seems like things have normalized, even if I use that word loosely, although it seems like Connor's mind is so far gone that the best we can really hope for is that he doesn't also end up like Leo. Although, at this point, my confidence level in him is pretty low. Now, as you've probably noticed, there aren't that many women occupying spaces on this list, mostly because the majority of people into bodybuilding are men. However, when women do fall into the same pitfalls, you can rest easy knowing that it's some truly deranged stuff. Case in point, Tammy Steffen, an unassuming mother of 4 who, as far as we can tell, had no previous history of doing anything illegal or even noteworthy. Besides being your bona fide soccer mom and housewife, she also either owned or worked for a business called Beyond Fit, which I think was both a gym and a small supplement brand, although both of them seem to have gone under after her legal issues. But beyond just being invested in a fitness-related business, Tammy had a personal investment and devotion to it, as she frequently took part in bodybuilding shows and even made some appearances on podcasts to promote her lifestyle. According to her description here, she had been training and coaching athletes for 15 years, offering services like personal training and nutrition programs. There was simply no sign that Tammy was anything other than a health-oriented business owner and bodybuilder. That is, until mid-2018, when almost 2 years worth of intense psychological obsession and delusion slowly came unraveled. It all started on July 9th of 2018, when Tammy called the local sheriff's office to report that someone had left a headless doll on her front porch with a note which read, "New toy for the kids." As you can imagine, this creepypasta scenario was extremely ominous for everyone who caught wind of it, especially since she lived in a peaceful city where this kind of thing simply didn't happen. Within 1 week of this bizarre incident, another report came in, this time of an attempted kidnapping. Around 7 p.m., a Hispanic male between 5'6" and 5'9", wearing all black clothes, approached Tammy's 12-year-old daughter and grabbed her arm while she was outside feeding the dogs, in an attempt to take her with him. Somehow, the girl managed to get away from the man uninjured, and he scattered off into the woods. By the time Tammy called the cops from inside the closet with a loaded gun, he was long gone. But nearby, they found a laptop case with a notepad inside of it, containing information about Tammy and her house. Now, based on her daughter's description of the man, she immediately recognized him as her former business partner, and thus a search began, with helicopters and dogs scouring through the woods, trying to find any sign of the suspect. This was as terrifying an incident as one could imagine, but there was just one problem with it. None of it actually happened. Every single detail about the supposed kidnapping attempt was a total lie, and Tammy had trained her daughter to recite it word for word, even pushing her daughter to pee herself so that the story would be more believable. Now, although this wasn't immediately clear, the police overheard Tammy's daughter asking her what would happen if she told the truth, which immediately tipped them off that the two weren't being completely forthcoming with law enforcement about what had actually happened. The final nail in this story's coffin was when they managed to get footage of Tammy at Walmart just a little while prior to the incident, buying the exact laptop case and blue notebook that supposedly belonged to the man who ran off into the woods. This headless doll was also Tammy's own work, but since it didn't yield the results she wanted, she decided to double down on trying to incriminate her former business partner. Just a few days after the report was first made, Tammy was arrested on charges of filing a false police report, tampering with evidence, child neglect, and witness tampering. The last charge actually resulted from Tammy calling her daughter while in jail, instructing her into taking the fall for the fake kidnapping story. It's bad enough to do something like this on your own, but to involve your child is another level of insanity. But don't worry, the worst is yet to come. During the investigation, the police caught wind that, at least in Tammy's mind, the man she was trying to frame was somehow responsible for her losing an online contest, which prompted them to see what she was up to on the internet. Apparently, for the previous 2 entire years, she had been systematically cyberstalking and harassing 6 people, one of which was her former employer, with threats to their lives, their careers, and their families. It took a while for law enforcement to coordinate and share the information they had, but once they did, they turned up with a total of 369 Instagram accounts and 18 different emails she had created for the sole purpose of terrorizing anyone who had wronged her, and her publicly available court documents revealed the extent and gravity of her obsessive harassment campaign. Although the names of her targets remain private, Tammy's messages were published, and they would be kind of funny if they weren't terrifying. On an account called Fit Life Annual, she wrote, "I just placed an order to roll out. Nothing left to lose. Time to act. Poop or full car destruction, haven't decided. I'm thinking a nice pile of human poop to begin with. Did you know you can default put dog poop, egg property, and so much more? Did you know it's not a crime at all? Do not want you shocked at the laws as the next phase happens. Once put acid on a girl's car with my ex-bestie, melted it to the ground, right in a high school parking lot. You might know who it is, but try to stop me. The wonderful thing is, I know the laws. I can move around like always. You are not very smart. I sat in front of a judge with a smile on my face." She then sent this person 3 pictures taken right outside where they worked as a threat. Now, just so we're clear here, she is absolutely lying. It's definitely not legal to throw shit on someone else's property. I don't know why that's a threat she was moving forward with, but regardless, this was just one person nicknamed KB in the court documents. And as I said earlier, there were a total of 6 people. To someone labeled MX, she said, "I plan to slice you up into little pieces. Your blood I shall taste." And these are just the written messages, as she conducted a whole parallel campaign of issuing death threats over phone calls
while using a voice disguising software.
Eventually, MX decided to call the number back, only to hear moaning because Tammy had set her voicemail sound to audio from an adult video. The funniest part is that the only reason the FBI was already onto her is because pretty much every single one of her targets knew she was behind it, because she would often just use emails and accounts under her own name to do this stuff. I assume that the frenzy and compulsion of her doing this prevented her from having very good OPSEC, but still, I don't know how she managed to get away with it for a whole 2 years. Ultimately, she was facing 1 count of cyberstalking and 1 count of interstate threats, each of which carried a maximum sentence of a $250,000 fine and 5 years in prison. By December 2018, basically a month after her court proceedings started, she pled guilty, although based on the legal information available, she's been released on probation for a little while by now. So if you're in Florida, be careful when hiring personal trainers. You never know when one of them will threaten to cover your car in dog poop. Very few people fit the bill for the definition of a fitness degenerate more than Mr. Brian Johnson, the Liver King, a lifelong con man and habitual liar whose passion for fitness drew him into manufacturing his overnight online fame, only for it to tear his life apart. Brian's life prior to the Liver King is told over a series of tall tales that embellish or completely fictionalize what actually happened. His childhood, he says, was extremely difficult and rife with bullying, as his classmates would do cruel things like choking him unconscious, and it got to the point he would no longer go to the bathroom or the cafeteria just to avoid socializing altogether. During this period of his life, he was already exercising, but it did very little to help his catastrophic social life. So naturally, he started planning for the next best thing: killing everybody who picked on him at school. Not exactly the healthiest way to go about it, but regardless, this may just be an exaggeration, and the same grain of salt should be applied to the extent of the bullying he suffered. I say this because, according to Brian, he claims he solved his situation by showing up to school in guest clothes and steel-toed boots. A few years later, he changed schools, and in one of the funniest turns of events, he felt left out because, in his words, they were too white. But at this point, he accepted that the way to make it was to simply put on another identity, which is pretty telling for the rest of his life, to be honest. Just like a chameleon, he once again blended into his new social paradigm. Although at this point in his life, early shadows of the Liver King persona started shining through, as Brian was already pretty ripped and had shaved half of one of his eyebrows off. It didn't take long for Brian to go professional with the fake it till you make it mentality, and unsurprisingly, he became a pharmaceutical rep. Honestly, that's gotta be one of the more fitting jobs for a guy who is dead set on being a con artist, but regardless, he started making $100,000 a year, eventually met his wife and married her. They started a supplement business together, had a couple of kids, and he was well on his way to being well off for the rest of his life, with nothing to really worry about besides enjoying his wealth with his family. But the thing about dishonest, shifty people is that they're never actually satisfied. They always want more. It's just never enough. Eventually, as his kids grew up, they started having some serious health issues, and this pushed Brian into getting heavy into organic, healthy living, which for him included eating raw animal parts. Based on the way he describes it, you would think that he slowly became the Liver King over the course of years, but this isn't really the case. Regardless of how devoted he was to living healthy, he had already been doing so since the 2000s and was still very much a normal guy by 2019, with no sign of the Liver King-itis affecting him quite yet. It's only 2 years later, in 2021, when the King makes his first appearance, having ballooned up to an insane size and randomly being featured by a massive fitness page on Facebook. Naturally, and I use that word loosely here since there's not very many natural things about Brian, people picked up on the fact that Brian probably paid for this video to get made and posted. Basically, this is the internet version of having a midlife crisis. Being a middle-aged, roided-up lunatic at his compound just wasn't enough anymore. He also had to be famous, and to do so, he tried as much as he could to run some kind of Andrew Tate operation and get people to sign up and buy his stuff. This clearly astroturfed effort was met with a lot of negative responses from people in the fitness community, but most importantly, Derek from More Plates, More Dates went in on him, with a particular focus on his area of expertise: steroids. Sure, there were other eccentric things about Brian, such as him claiming that he didn't wipe after he used the bathroom, but that's much less far-fetched than him claiming to have achieved his physique naturally, which Derek carefully explains is extremely unlikely to say the least. For a moment, it seemed like the public was warming up to him, as people like Danny Gonzalez and Jesse James West made videos about him where Brian was painted more as a harmless eccentric than a deceptive con artist. However, the combined efforts of Joe Rogan, John Bravo, and More Plates, More Dates set the stage for his inevitable downfall.
And he was telling people that the way he gets that way is by sunning his balls. He literally lays down with his asshole staring at the sun and eats raw liver and just lifts like a maniac. And that's how he's so jacked. But it's preposterous.
Eventually, Brian was revealed to be what many people already thought of him as: someone who blatantly and repeatedly lied about his extreme and expensive steroid use, which he was doing to sell products of dubious quality. Additionally, most of the online attention he got was paid for out of his own pocket. There was almost nothing about Brian that was legitimate or sincere, and no matter how entertaining he was as a persona, this degree of dishonesty was intolerable. The death blow was dealt by Moist Critical, who presented just how much of a fraud Brian was. Although there was a pathetic attempt at an apology video, it was too little, too late, and the Liver King was resigned to be nothing but a joke, a parody of a fitness influencer. His former fans and customers sued him for fraud to the tune of $25 million. With nothing left resembling a legit audience, Brian eventually doubled down on his delusion. He took a bunch of hallucinogens in foreign countries, got a Netflix documentary made on him, where he notably admitted to committing actual fraud fraud during his days as a pharma rep, and he was also exposed for committing fraud by lying about the ingredients of his supplements. Not to mention, he started to make threats on Joe Rogan's life, while also accusing him of being a fake Jew.
But not you fake Jews. What you're trying to do is be greedy and slime balls and put more cash in your pocket out of not principle. Fake Jews do that. They wear hats. They call themselves Sheldon and Joe Snurlman.
Between that and the schizophrenic Instagram reels where he's talking about his enema bucket, he eventually traveled to Austin, Texas, where Joe Rogan lives, only to get arrested before he could even get near him. After being charged with making terrorist threats and handed a restraining order, he did eventually back off. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem he's gotten any more sane since then. These days, you're more likely to catch Brian at Arkham Asylum rather than making YouTube videos at his $50 billion compound. Bertil Fox was a Caribbean-British professional bodybuilder whose most notable deed, besides obviously his crime, was getting 5th place in the 1983 Mr. Olympia. This is notable not only because it was the highest he could get, but also because, in the opinion of many people, even today, that was an extremely unfair placement, with a lot of people even thinking he should have gotten 1st place and won the competition entirely. With a reputation for going exceptionally hard in the gym, he earned the attention and respect of possibly the most well-known bodybuilder of all time, Arnold, who remarked that Bertil was probably going to win the 1983 Olympia. Although he continued to compete professionally after 1983, he never placed any higher in another Olympia championship, and eventually retired from the sport altogether in the mid to late 90s. An editor of the bodybuilder magazine Flex claimed that regardless of him being robbed of the Olympia in 1983, Bertil was actually his own worst problem, as he tended to fold under pressure, self-destructing in a variety of ways whenever another contest approached, and blaming others for his own shortcomings. Bertil was described as something of an immature loner with low self-esteem, and at least partly, this was due to bullying he suffered when he was still in school, some of which had to do with how short he was. I'd almost say that this description makes him someone you'd want to sympathize with, considering he went on to be successful despite these hang-ups. However, considering how he ultimately turned out, the real tragedy is that someone else had to suffer for Bertil's stunted development. When he retired, he was still healthy, which is something plenty of former pro bodybuilders cannot say. Some former competitors like Marcus Rule, who also never won a Mr. Olympia competition, retired gracefully and went on to become minor celebrities, widely respected in the country they came from. This was Bertil's plan initially, as he moved back to the small Caribbean nation he hailed from, St. Kitts and Nevis, which has a pretty small population of less than 50,000 inhabitants. Usually, when successful people like Bertil decide to move to places as small as that, it's to live out a more quiet life away from the spotlight. Unfortunately, this is not what happened after he retired. Instead, now 44-year-old Bertil Fox began a relationship with Laoka Brown, a model who was 20 years younger than him. Over these 2 years, according to people who knew them both, there was some degree of physical violence coming from Bertil, but they didn't see it as anything extreme to the point of getting the police involved. In 1997, however, that would change for the worse, as Laoka decided to break it off with him right before he left for a show in London. Still very much living the bodybuilder lifestyle, Bertil was on steroids, and didn't take well to this, calling her multiple times from London to try to win her back, to no avail. When he finally returned in September of 1997, she already had a new boyfriend, which sent him into a frenzy of anger and jealousy. Now, this is when Bertil's story diverges from that of pretty much every other person who witnessed this go down, including his best friend, Edmund Tross, who had every reason to be partial to Bertil over Laoka. According to Bertil, when he arrived at the place Laoka was at, her mother, Violet, started taunting him with a gun he had left with Laoka. A scuffle then took place as Violet attempted to push Bertil outside, causing him to accidentally discharge the weapon at Laoka and then at Violet. But Laoka's body was found outside with a gunshot wound in her back. But even if that hadn't been the case, this story is exactly as silly as it sounds, and no one in court bought it. But there's another, much more corroborated sequence of events. According to Edmund, Bertil arrived with the firearm already on him, most likely with ill intent. He was first met by Laoka, the two started arguing, Violet intervened, at which point she could be heard screaming, "Don't come in here with that," presumably in reference to the gun. Unfortunately, he didn't listen and proceeded to shoot both of them dead. Immediately after it happened, Bertil ran to Edmund's office and outright confessed to having killed both of them, with no claim that it was done in self-defense or anything like that. Later on, in court, it was discovered that the reason for Laoka Layoka and Bertil's argument was a $1,500 wire transfer that Layoka had received from a man named Jason, which is what Bertil had gone there to confront her about. Now, despite how clear-cut this double homicide case seemed to be, it took until February of the next year for court to take place. And even then, it ended with a stalemate in the jury, requiring a retrial. 3 months later, his sentence came through. Death by hanging, which is apparently mandatory in the nation of St. Kitts and Nevis. It's hard to imagine a downfall as dramatic as this. From being a successful free man traveling around the world as a bodybuilder to shedding 70 pounds in a dark Caribbean prison waiting for his execution. Surprisingly enough, the execution was staved off in favor of life in prison, citing his use of steroids since the age of 14 as the justification for lightening his sentence. Then, just a few years ago, the Governor General of St. Kitts and Nevis completely pardoned a now 70-something-year-old Bertil Fox, who was once again a free man. It's actually shocking that this is how a double homicide case ended up, although at this stage in his life, it's unlikely he'll reoffend. In another case where a career criminal creates a completely fake life and persona with the intent of making money off of people who fall for his shtick online, we have Wes Watson. But we don't just have Wes, we also have Mike Van Wyck and Callie Muscle. Also, I'm sorry, but I saw this video of Callie Muscle, so now you have to see it too.
Today in this video, I'm going to be watching Backrooms found footage video.
Subscribe for more! Due to a single incident involving fellow fitness influencer Jeff Nipples being attacked in his gym, it seems that the entire Miami scene of Instagram alpha males with hypogonadism has been hung out to dry all at once. But we're going to go about this in parts. First, we have Wes Watson, a man who claimed to have started hustling at 11 years old, becoming the first ever middle school mafioso in San Diego, California, which eventually landed him in prison. In reality, he was a snowboarding teenager from a good family who occasionally sold small amounts of weed, and apparently he wasn't that good at his job since the only reason he went to jail was because he assaulted and robbed some guy who owed someone else $5 grand. After that, he got addicted to meth and proceeded to spend 7 years in a low-security out-of-state prison, which he has since continuously lied about, saying he was actually in the hardest, highest security prison in California. When he came out, he briefly worked as a personal trainer and used his prison time as a marketing tactic, which he quickly realized was very effective. Being the criminal-minded con man he is, he proceeded to come up with a variety of tall tales about how much contraband he packed in his butt during his 10 years of hard time, usually mixed with stories he probably heard from other people while in prison. This earned him a lot of YouTube fame, and it took about a year before it got to his head, which got further accelerated when he moved to Miami to live as a full-time influencer, parading around his leased cars and rented mansion while recording Instagram videos where he screams at his audience,
"Oh my God, that would be lame,"
about how they're all beta males because they don't make $2 million a month like he does.
These are the people who make the videos calling studs like me fake alphas.
Of course, he doesn't make $2 million a month. He doesn't own any of the stuff in his videos, and the women he's seeing are probably the only thing he actually pays for. But apparently, he pays them for more than just taking pictures on Instagram. According to some of his exes, but mainly his ex-wife, Valerie, he likes to hit them, and on occasion, when he's in a good mood, he has them peg him to remember the good old days in prison. Additionally, he missed prison so much that he decided to hit other people besides his girlfriends to see if he could get back in there, after making a public invitation to any hater of his to fight one-on-one. When one guy showed up, Wes invoked 4 or 5 of his sunburnt and overweight cronies to hit the guy with dumbbells and kick him in the head after he was down, like a real man. After the fact, Wes started falsely claiming that the guy approached him and initiated the fight, and said that he only fought back because the guy was a 7-foot monster, as he put it, and the guy was definitely not 7 feet tall. I understand why he'd say that though, given that Wes is 5'8" and extremely insecure about it, going as far as to wear massive lifts in his shoes to look like he's 6 feet tall. Regardless, the incident between Wes and the 7-foot monster was inspired by Mike Van Wyck recently assaulting Jeff Nipples in the gym. Because, I mean, actually there's not that much of a good reason other than the two disagreed over lifting styles. If that sounds ridiculous and childish, it's because it is. But of course, Wes was the first one who ran to his defense.
So you guys, there's a video online going around of some monster-ass fool pushing some keyboard warrior princess little punk by his neck because he saw him in person. You pussies are in the comments going, he should press charges. No, he should get pushed by the neck and then get his head stepped on, and everybody else should say, good bitch.
Another person who partnered up with Wes by extension was Callie Muscle, someone who also spent a total of 11 years in prison for pretty murky reasons, although he claims they were due to a fight he got into and a few robberies. It was in prison that he developed his dream of becoming a bodybuilder and a stripper. His dream was to become a stripper. It seems he stuck to his plans, as immediately after he left prison, he was out there with nipple piercings and the whole nine. But his mind ultimately changed when opportunities presented themselves to become much more. Throughout the early 2010s, Callie Muscle became an extremely successful YouTuber thanks to his unique fitness videos, and this led him to appear in several commercials. However, due to his lack of ethics in general, his money was pretty mismanaged. And now, he's on the hook for some serious legal trouble due to one of his protein cookie companies called Crackies being shut down by the FDA due to the products causing cancer. Additionally, he recently had a massive heart attack, and although he recovered pretty well and went back to making videos, he's gotten pretty close to Wes Watson, so it's only a matter of time before he gets into even more problems with the law. Likewise, Wes is likely going to get into some trouble sooner or later, if not for the scammy way he runs his personal trainer business, then for the extremely shady car business he's recently gotten involved in. Alexis Wright was a 30-year-old single mom and Zumba fitness instructor who operated a studio in Kennebunk, Maine. Not only does Kennebunk have a population of just 10,000 people, Maine in general tends to be the land where nothing ever happens. And on top of that, Alexis herself seems normal, just a woman who ran a health and fitness business in the suburbs with the help of Mark Strong Sr., an insurance agent in his late 50s, who was married and had 2 kids. But unbeknownst to anyone, Alexis was doing a lot more than Zumba with her clients. Around 2007, she started offering prostitution services to some of them. Adding to how bizarre and out of place this is, Mark didn't just know about it, but he was the one who ran the prostitution ring as a business. He was the one who handled the money, booked the clients, and kept the whole thing working. Over the course of the half a decade or so, during which this business operated with no intervention from law enforcement, Alexis and Mark managed to get some pretty high-profile clients, at least high-profile for Kennebunk. A firefighter, a lawyer, a minister, a high school hockey coach, and even a former mayor were not only on the client list, but also on tape, receiving and paying for Alexis's services. These recordings were part of Mark's system, who, 100 miles away in his office, kept footage of everything that went down, which most likely was for the purpose of blackmail. In just a year and a half, their operation made $150,000, which, when evenly split halfway between Mark and Alexis, was still a sizable chunk of change for each. But obviously this operation was not legal, and it was only a matter of time before the law caught wind of it. The total number of clients is estimated to be around 150, which is actually a smaller number than I expected. Based on the retelling of one of the events, Alexis's rate was $250. So for 18 months, like I mentioned, she was doing her work for a total of 600 hours. But that pans out to be around 8 hours of doing the deed per week. In text message exchanges she had with Mark, she says she won't perform until Mark is watching to ensure her safety. And then she immediately goes on to say that she saw 3 men on Thursday and 5 men on Friday. 5 men in a single day is pulling Diddy numbers. And it's worth noting that one of these men was named as a client on both days. How good was the Zumba pussy? The Zumbussy? Zumbussy? How good was it? I need to know.
Clock strikes 12. Midnight arrives.
Anyway, they went on grinding away guerrilla style for years, and in the meantime, she married a guy named Jason who may or may not have been one of her clients. Additionally, she got herself a natural sciences degree. Good on her for not putting all of her eggs in one basket, even if about 150 men are putting their eggs in her basket. But like all great criminal minds, Alexis got a little too bold, a little too reckless with her illicit activities, and it ended with her capture. I'm assuming with the intention to make even more money, Alexis rented out yet another office space and started publicly secretly advertising her massage services on a website called Sensual Bodywork by Lydia. And although the name was obviously fake, there was a picture of Alexis posing with a teddy bear that was unmistakably her. If that wasn't bad enough, she started posting hundreds of not safe for work videos and photos online with no concern to not be identified in them. Some of them were even under her real name, or very obvious aliases like Zumba Whore and Main Zumba Queen. It's almost like she wanted to get caught at this point, turning her practices into an open secret. But as you can imagine, her fellow Zumba attending moms weren't exactly the demographic who searches for seedy adult videos online, so it took a while for them to catch wind of what their perceived peer was up to. It got to a point where she was basically bragging about the stuff she did, as she posted on a blog under a nickname that was recognizably hers, saying, "I live in a small town in Maine and have my own dance studio. Many in my community do not realize that I am an exhibitionist. I have had intercourse with many of the married men locally, and it is satisfying to know I am providing them with what they are not getting at home. If only the women knew." On her Facebook page, although the majority of the posts were exclusively related to her normal life, there was the occasional link that led you directly to her shadier online presence. One of the non-client attendees who was considering asking Alexis out wrote a comment, which read, "She was clearly putting it out there that she might be interested in getting to know me better. When I went home that night, I did a simple web search of her and was astounded by what I saw and the seemingly endless collection of crazy stuff she was into. Threesomes with out-of-shape, middle-aged bisexual dudes." How she managed to keep this a secret from law enforcement for years is genuinely beyond me, because her OPSEC was non-existent. But in 2011, things started coming to a head. Her landlord had received some complaints from Alexis's neighboring tenants about hearing a lot of moaning and groaning throughout the day, and so the landlord decided to do what many others had already done: look her name up. I'm not going to go over what he found in detail, but in the video he saw, he noticed that the footage had been recorded on his property, which must have been uncomfortable to say the least. This was just one of many compounding reports of people who were noticing what Alexis was up to, and when this information made its way to the police, they began investigating. The initial assumption was simply that she was producing adult videos, but quickly it became clear she was doing much more than that. Funnily enough, the first people who were completely in the know about Alexis's side business were high school boys who, due to being internet savvy, were not only aware of it, but had its existence turned into a joke amongst themselves. When the police finally caught up, they conducted a search of her properties, finding a bottle of Astroglide, 4 bottles of baby oil, 9 cameras, multiple laptops, DVDs, hard drives, $1,000 in cash, surveillance glasses, night vision goggles, and most importantly, a series of spreadsheets containing detailed information about every single encounter she had had with a client, with their email addresses and phone numbers attached to the money she'd made off of them and hours worth of footage of all of them in action. And again, like all great criminal minds, she only got in really hot water when the police ran the numbers and found out she had been lying to the IRS to keep getting child support and food stamps. Like a wise man once said,
"I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS? No, thank you."
Once the police discovered the connection between Alexis and Mark Strong, both of them were arrested. Not only was their financial connection discovered, but they also turned up footage of both of them going at it in every way imaginable, although apparently he got the services for free. Alexis was initially charged with 106 counts of engaging in prostitution, conspiracy, and tax evasion, while Mark faced 59 misdemeanor counts of promoting prostitution, violation of privacy, and conspiracy. It wasn't looking good for either of them. What's even more shocking is that Mark turned out to be a private investigator, so he absolutely knew how vulnerable he was to law enforcement, and yet the Zumba Latina charm was simply irresistible. The only explanation, as the prosecution speculated, was that the amount of information they had collected and maintained was for the sake of extortion. But again, how could they extort people effectively when they themselves would suffer consequences if evidence was released? Whatever the reality is, when the case finally went to trial, there was a brief attempt at a defense from Alexis, who tried to claim she had been victimized by her father and was under the delusional impression that her work as a masseuse was somehow part of an investigation into sexual deviance. As tragic, dark, and somewhat explanatory as the story about her father is, there's just no connection between any of these things, and her defense lawyers quickly adjusted. Mark got off real easy, having 49 of his 59 charges dismissed, getting convicted on the remaining ones, and serving just 20 days in jail, as he managed to prove he wasn't profiting off of the business. Evilness. Alexis somehow also managed to get 80 counts of her charges dropped, being sentenced to pay $58,000 in restitution and 10 months in jail, of which she only served 6. Besides them, 68 of Alexis's clients were also charged, but due to the sensitive nature of the situation, their names and charges haven't been made public as far as I can tell. Craig Titus was a highly accomplished bodybuilder who placed as high as 11th in the Mr. Olympia, while Kelly Ryan won the Miss Fitness America title and the Fitness Olympia competition, becoming one of the most decorated female fitness athletes of her era. For a while, they were very unique in that both of them were bodybuilders, which made them something of a high-profile couple in the bodybuilding world, frequently appearing in magazines and other media. But beyond their glamorous lifestyle, both Craig and Kelly struggled with substance abuse issues, not only involving the obvious steroid use, but also the use of prescription painkillers, coke, and meth. Additionally, their relationship was pretty volatile and only got more crazy as their financial lives tightened when sponsorships became less frequent, with the final trigger to their crime being them hiring Melissa James, another aspiring bodybuilder, as a personal assistant in the early 2000s. Melissa moved in with them to help them run their retail store, which was as bad of an idea as you can possibly imagine, since Melissa also had addictions, money problems, and other issues that led to her having friction with the couple. It didn't take long for Craig and Kelly to start suspecting that Melissa had been secretly taking money and pills from them, which escalated until December of 2005 when they decided to go their separate ways, and Melissa was briefly staying at a motel until she could catch a flight home. Unfortunately, she never managed to catch that flight, as on December 14th, the cops were called to a burning car right outside of Las Vegas, with Melissa's charred body in the trunk. Her head had been wrapped in duct tape, and she had ligature marks on her neck. Now, there was some speculation that this might have been related to Melissa's boyfriend, as it's often the case that murders are committed by significant others. However, all of the mystery went right out the window when the car that Melissa's body was found in, a red 2003 Jaguar, was traced right back to Kelly Ryan. When the police arrived and began interrogating the couple, they immediately noticed that the way Kelly and Craig behaved indicated that Craig had instructed her on how to act, which became even more clear once the police separated them. During these one-on-one conversations, for whatever reason, Craig randomly confessed to the cops that he had had an affair with Melissa and that his wife had no idea about it. But besides this revelation, their story maintained the same. They had agreed to part ways with Melissa and set her up in a motel waiting for a flight to New Jersey, and they didn't know about anything else. Despite the couple having no prior violent criminal offenses, they were heavily suspected, so the police started investigating. Through the testimonies of 2 different people, just a couple of days later after Melissa's body was found, it was ascertained that Kelly had been falsely claiming that Melissa had died of an overdose, and another person alleged that he had met Craig and Kelly at a gas station where they were both filling up gas cans, presumably to torch the Jaguar with Melissa's body in it. Soon after, they pulled Melissa's credit card records, only to find that it had been used to purchase 7 bottles of lighter fluid shortly before her body was found. Finally, when the police went to revisit Craig and Kelly, they found that both of them had fled Las Vegas entirely. During the few days during which they were fugitives, another witness came forward and alleged that shortly before her death, Melissa and Kelly had a pretty bad fight, with the specific mention that Melissa had threatened Kelly with a taser, only for Kelly to turn it on her and then choke her to death. Unsurprisingly, forensics found that Melissa's cause of death was asphyxiation, and an investigation of Kelly and Craig's home found evidence of a taser discharge. In an attempt to try and salvage the clear murder, the couple first poured morphine down Melissa's throat to try and make her death seem like an overdose. Obviously, that didn't work, and so they then moved on to try and destroy all of the evidence. It didn't take long for Craig and Kelly to be found in Boston, be extradited back to Vegas, and properly processed. Within half a year of the body's discovery, Craig pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to up to 55 years in prison, while Kelly pled guilty to arson and battery with a deadly weapon, getting 2 consecutive terms that could add up to 13 years in prison. As of 2017, she was released on parole, which is pretty surprising considering the gravity of her crime. Even more concerning is that while Craig remains in prison, he'll be eligible in 2026. So soon enough, both of these criminals will be free again. Like many of the other people on this list, and it seems like it's a pattern with criminals in general, Australian bodybuilder Mark Rodney Jones is a repeat offender who, by an unfortunate turn of fate, was freed for his first crime despite it being heinous and unspeakable in nature. All the way back in 1997, when Mark was in his early 20s, he brought a 17-year-old girl with him to a secluded area after they had danced at a party. When the girl expressed that she didn't want to take it further, Mark did not accept it, and proceeded to strangle her almost to the point of death while assaulting her viciously, although I'm going to refrain from going into any further detail due to how gruesome the situation was. When it ended, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't believe I just did that," as if that improved the situation at all. The very next day, he was interviewed by the police and charged, and a few months later, in early 1998, he was set to show up in court, but instead, he attempted to flee justice. Fortunately, he was found, extradited, and properly processed, pleading guilty to his charges and reiterating his apology, adding that he himself was a victim of a similar kind of violence. Now, on one hand, there is something to be said about the cycle of abuse that happens with people like this. It is, in fact, common that people who are victimized, especially in their youth, will go on to victimize others when they are an adult, but that obviously doesn't excuse their actions. Someone with that level of lack of impulse control is exactly the kind of person that should be locked away, separated from society for good. It's especially concerning since just a few years prior, in 1995, an almost identical situation took place. And although he was found guilty, his conviction was thrown out due to issues with the jury, resulting in him serving only 13 months of jail time. Sadly, we don't live in the kind of world that appropriately handles those situations, and not only did Mark manage to get away with it in 1995, but his 1998 conviction only earned him a sentence of 5 years in jail. To make things even more absurd, while still in jail for a conviction of a crime that egregious, some woman actually decided to marry him while he was locked up. Keep in mind, we haven't even gotten to the crime Mark committed while being an active bodybuilder. The sheer sequence of events here is just unbelievable. This guy, after having been found guilty of 2 of these crimes, at least the ones that we know of, thought it was a good idea to make a career out of blasting steroids. But it appears that despite having made appearances in some bodybuilding contests and apparently being convicted of smuggling steroids in 2014, his bodybuilding legacy never really went anywhere. And as far as we know, during the few decades after his release, he didn't actually reoffend. However, in 2017, this would change, although he wouldn't simply go back to committing the same crime. Mark had something very different in mind. When someone had stolen his car, he became extremely desperate, the reason being that he was just about to sell it. And as a result, he was offering a $5,000 reward to anyone who got it back, but no one took him up on it. Eventually, for reasons I can't quite understand, he settled on Bradley Breward as the car thief, although clearly he himself wasn't even sure that it was Bradley, as his own actions show. The only piece of evidence pointing to any connection to Bradley is a text message exchange between Mark and Bradley's mom, where she says that Mark shouldn't lend anything to Bradley as he was an untrustworthy drug addict. Whatever substance abuse issues Bradley may have had, it's unknown whether Mark actually lent him the vehicle and never got it back, or if he just suggested that to Bradley's mom. Mark's previous crimes, while horrible, were also impulsive, but this time his crime would be sickeningly premeditated. Mark was sending his friends texts about how Bradley was gonna pay when he got him. Usually people just mean they're gonna beat someone up when they say that, but Mark had much more insidious intentions. In another text message, he specifically said he's going to die and be brought back to life many times over. This was not an exaggeration. This was genuinely what Mark Jones intended to do to Bradley Breward. He got together with his employee, Ricky Izzard, and supposedly offered to pay $1,000 to the woman that was housing Bradley at that time, although it's not confirmed if she took the money or not. When they got confirmation of where Bradley was, they went to find him wearing masks and gloves and kidnapped him, tying his hands and ankles with tape and proceeding to torture him while interrogating him about the car. And when I say torture, I don't mean run-of-the-mill physical violence. They actually waterboarded this poor kid. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's basically drowning you by putting a cloth over your face and pouring water over it, which Mark and Ricky did multiple times, doing it for as many as 40 seconds straight. Of course, Bradley didn't say anything about the car's whereabouts, and it's likely because he was simply innocent of the car theft. Eventually, Mark and Bradley murdered this 22-year-old kid, although their intention was to continue waterboarding him until he gave up the car. When they realized what they had done, they attempted to give him CPR, and when that failed, they simply dumped his body in a lake. Within a month or so of the crime being committed, the police had a pretty easy time connecting Mark to the crime, as he had basically basically made no effort to try and maintain his innocence. It's legitimately hard to understand how a mind like this works. A 43-year-old man with a partner and 2 kids decides to take some kid's life over a car he wasn't even sure he had stolen. While being interviewed by the police just a few weeks after having committed the crime, he never expressed any regret. Instead, only discussed that Bradley had died, as he was intent on continuing the torture. Despite his lack of concern with proving his own innocence, he tried to plead not guilty, which was shut down when a witness came forward and told the full story to the police, which was later corroborated by Mark's own accomplice, Ricky. After just 2 hours of jury deliberation, he was unanimously found guilty, and although he cried, he continued to express no remorse, even as his partner and the mother of one of his children became desperate at the verdict. Soon after, Mark Rodney Jones was sentenced to 22 years in prison, although he'll become eligible for parole in just 13, partly because it appears the jury was not made familiar with his past criminal history, which is downright insane in a case as vile as this one. Ricky, on the other hand, got 10 years and parole in 6. It's worth noting that for every case I've covered today, there's 100 or even 1,000 other bodybuilders who are perfectly fine as people. Even among steroid users, ultimately, the only person that most of them are hurting is themselves. But due to a combination of factors, the people we've discussed today have ultimately torched their lives for the worst. And I think given the opportunity to retrace their steps, many of them would probably give up on all of the gains just for a chance to be happy and do right by the people around them. Unfortunately, many simply don't learn until it's too late. I've been Turkey Tom, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye.